Hello, my name's Stand-in Stan, and I'm with my proverbial sparring partner, Andrew Bryan. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm doing just fine, and I am with Gabriel, otherwise known as Stand-in Stan. How are you doing today, you Yankee bastard?
Well, you're already handling this a lot better than my co-host Jamie did on the Jaded podcast because I did that to him and it blew his mind and he felt lost. It took him like a moment to. I don't know. I think it's like episode 6 or something. I can't remember.
Uh-huh.
We record them in groups the same way as we do this, but he was bewildered for a moment and really had to. Like he
See,
forgot who
that's
he
the kind
was.
of that's the kind of shit that me and my brother do all the time. So I'm right used to it.
Did you do the thing of like one of you would break a plate and then the other one would be like, no, no, he's not Gabriel, I am.
Oh, dude, we did more. When we were in school, we switched classes. Once we switched grades, we switched all. I mean, we would impersonate each other constantly when we were younger, and nobody ever fucking figured it out. Quick, interesting story about that. As the audience may or may not know, my brother is a YouTuber who started out being minorly famous, and then I tried to ride his coattails, and it didn't quite work out. I just got a real job or whatever. But identical twins, and at one point, when I was 19 years old, I dated I dated a girl who was herself an identical twin, and my brother and her sister were both single. The only problem was they had absolutely nothing but platonic feelings for each other, and our friends begged them, begged them to live in a world where one set of twins and another set of twins were all dating each other, and it didn't happen. But it never.
Well, that's a great American tragedy right there.
Uh-oh.
That is a great American tragedy. And speaking of great American tragedies, I found out that after Avengers Infinity War, there's going to be 20 more Marvel films lined up, and I'm done. I'm not doing it anymore. I can't.
So, my question to you: do you not find that these Marvel movies are getting more ambitious?
I don't see how they're getting more ambitious.
Well, I mean, if you so, I think that it started out kind of just Marvel movies about Marvel movies, especially something like Iron Man 2. Basically, just a commercial about how they were doing a cinema universe. And then Thor, I actually kind of liked Thor, but it was really just more of the same. Recently, it seems I thought Doctor Strange was pretty good. It kind of followed the same formula. Guardians of the Galaxy 2 was just a damn good movie in its own right. That could have been the first one, and it was kind of I don't know. It had a theme to it. It was like who your family really is, and it was about family and friendship and stuff. And recently, Black Panther, I thought, was a kind of a very Star Trekky sort of way of looking at modern things that are happening, but wrapping it up in like a bunch of like comic books and bullshit so that you could look at it and it's safe to look at, like Star Trek did. I don't know. It just seems, and what was the other one? Winter Soldier, I thought was pretty offbeat from the Marvel movies and was pretty good. It just seems like they're um the longer this goes on, the more freedom that the writers are having, it seems to me anyway, to go outside of the Marvel boxes.
Well, I've got nothing but good things to say about Guardians Volume 2. I think that one's really, really good. But if you're talking about Black Panther, I think Black Panther has the exact same problem Civil War does, is it wants you to think that it's talking about something clever, but it doesn't actually want to talk about it. It wants to just shove fight scenes in your face. And you could argue, well, it's a superhero action movie, except for the fact that superhero comics were always about the story. Like, if like Black Panther lifts that story somewhat from the Christopher Priest run of Black Panther, and it's a very similar concept. The only difference is that Christopher Priest's run on the character actually uses those things. It's actually about those things. Black Panther talks slightly about black oppression for a little bit, then it gets bored, and then you've got a horribly CGI'd fight between two people both dressed in black in a tunnel. These films aren't about the things like Black Panther's not about black politics. It's not about, you know, nationalism versus globalism. It's just using it as a, and it handles that theme very poorly as well, because that all that Killmonger is saying is a more militarized version of what T'Challa's love interest is saying as well. So he could have just as easily taken that away from her instead of Killmonger, considering him and Killmonger basically never talk in the entire film. They have a single conversation in which nothing is said except for, ask me who I am, ask me who I am. By the way, I challenge you. And that's not me saying that Black Panther is a bad film. I just think that it's another Marvel film. It's the only difference.
You didn't find the thematic. What's the word I'm looking for? You didn't find the thematic stuff as poignant people might seem to. You a bit more shallow than I did.
Well, I don't think. I think the reason I think it's shallow is because the film doesn't allow itself to talk about these issues. It seemed to me like they wanted to make a political statement while at the same time being a superhero movie. And in trying to do both, they just neglected both. You could, like, The Dark Knight is a film that is very much about ideas. And the real difference between The Dark Knight is those ideas are at the forefront of that film. The action set pieces further the ideas. The stuff with the boat and that's a set piece that, is meant to be like, oh wow, I remember that bit from that film. But it furthered the ideas of the Joker. Killmonger gets nothing like that, and the reason I harp on Killmonger is because Killmonger is where the heart of this film should be, because of the personal politics they gave the character, which was that he was a militant black supremacist, and for reasons that were understandable, but the film doesn't allow him to be a villain. It sidelines him from the entire film until the last 30 minutes or so, and then he's in there. It doesn't allow him to talk, and because he's the only character putting forward these ideas in a manner that is relevant to the plot, that stops the film from being about those ideas. Like,
I think
girlfriend is not a relevant plot character. She's a side character that has a limited interaction with the plot. Her character isn't in a position to bring these ideas forward. The only character that is barely in the movie.
Now, so let me see. Let me try to unpack some of what you just said. So here's how I saw it. So, did you ever see that Star Trek episode with the guys that are half black and half white?
I'm not a huge Star Trek fan. I'm not like seen every episode sort of thing. So
gotcha.
No, probably not.
That's okay. There was in the Star Trek episode.
Do you mean like mixed race, or is it down the middle?
No, down the middle. One half of their body was white, the other half of black. And the whole point of the episode was there were two people that were half black, half white, and they both hated each other. And one was a supremacist over the other, and the crew couldn't understand why this was. And at the end, the guy, one of the guys was like, yeah, he's black on the right side. All of his people are black on the right side, and so they're inferior. And all the Enterprise crew can see is, well, you're both half black and half white. What the fuck difference does it make? And they were kind of looking at racism, except putting it in a totally safe, inoffensive way, where you're like, oh yeah, that is kind of arbitrary of why they would think, maybe this thing that I think might be arbitrary. That was kind of how I saw what they were trying to do with Black Panther. You're quite right. Was they weren't directly talking about the idea they were portraying like they did at night. But I don't think that was their intention. I think they were going about talking about these things in a different way. Killmonger was a stand-in for militant nationalism. And in a lot of ways, T'Challa was a stand-in for sort of isolationism. These were two concepts that were sort of floating around the movie. The movie did take a very indirect path to getting there, and it was sort of I don't want to say I don't mean glossed over, but that's the only word I can think of. It was kind of it inoculated the audience by having all those action scenes, I think, anyway, and by a lot the special effects and the ooh wow pretty shiny things on screen to sort of make that more digestible, because it was for very, very general audiences that would normally see a Marvel movie probably wouldn't be disposed to seeing something like that, which is one of the reasons that I thought that it had actually a lot of balls for even attempting to mention that kind of stuff.
I don't
Real
think so.
quick.
I don't think so. The reason I don't think so is because there was nothing risky in what they talked about. It was
Oh
something.
my goodness.
Is that a reaction?
No, that was a reaction. No, there was a reaction to what you said. I I just disagree. To take a Marvel movie, which is by definition just sort of your popcorn summer movie, and try to say something in it, I thought was a fairly, especially something as topical as that, I thought was a fairly big risk on their
Of
part.
of course it's not though, because the thing is you look at the political landscape in Hollywood. Hollywood is a liberal left wing. I don't know what to say establishment, but you had your Oscars so white the last couple years, protesting getting more diverse Oscar picks. You have movies like Get Out that came out recently, 12 Years a Slave. I don't think films that are sympathetic to black politics are in any way controversial or a risk to take. I mean, if you want to take that stance, you take that stance. If you want to make your movie about that, you make your movie about that. But I don't think it was risky for them to, by and large, say what everyone says. I mean, in fact, I would say that the film plays middleman so much, which I'm not opposed to, but the fact that it plays middleman so much, just on the fence, is a good example of it not taking a risk. It doesn't like.
I don't I
And
don't
also,
think that it was. Go ahead.
And also, if you think that there's a problem with Marvel movies, like saying that they're not being intellectual enough, that's a problem that Marvel wrote themselves into when they decided that they wanted to take out all of the interesting philosophical and politically driven storylines from the comics. Comic books have always been political. It's just that they didn't want that their movies, and this is why I really object when people say that Marvel does their comic books just like the movies. Like does their movies just like the comic books. The reason I really object to that is because the Marvel movies take out sizable portions of what made Marvel comics deep. Iron Man. A big story for Iron Man was the fact that he was an alcoholic. And that was something he had to reconcile with. That was a big deal. They took that out. That was something that they wrote themselves into. But I don't think it was a risk for Black Panther to have the subject matter it did, when, for a start, it's a Black Panther comic, like based on a Black Panther comic, but also the fact that it's come out in a climate in which politicizing is all the rage, you know?
Well, I don't think that politicizing is all the rage in Marvel movies, but I particularly
No, I
don't
mean in
think.
Hollywood in general.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, but okay, but the way that they did it, and maybe this is just a difference in perception that we had. I don't think that they were talking about black politics so much as they were talking about national politics that could be going on anywhere. I think that they were talking about the broader subject of nationalism versus isolationism and the pros and cons of both, because Killmonger was a little bit right and T'Challa was a little bit wrong in some places. And one of the things that I ended up thinking after I saw this, and I know we don't want to get too political on this thing, but one of the things that I ended up thinking was, I think that a very, very extreme sort of militant Black Lives Matter activist and a very, very extreme militant sort of Trump supporter type could have both in this movie and come away thinking, maybe I should change my approach a little bit. And I think the overall point of the movie was, don't allow your legitimate feelings of anger and injustice to push you into being an extremist. And that was one of the reasons that I thought that Killmonger, he didn't really need to say more, because what he was a stand-in for can't be remedied other than the only thing that can stop something like that is force, which I also thought was a little bit meaningful. I don't know. I didn't quite. Go ahead.
I would say that the real distinction between them was not that one was a nationalist and one was a globalist. It was their identity. T'Challa is someone that believes in cultural identity, a Wakandan. This is the same in the comic books. I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is currently writing Black Panther, is kind of trying to retcon this, but, you know, that's his deal. But before that, Black Panther's stance was very much, it wasn't that he was black, it was that he was Wakandan. His national, cultural identity came first. Killmonger is a racial identity. It's not so much, Killmonger's not a globalist, not as such, as much as he thinks that black is the culture. I don't think it's so much of a... I mean, nationalism and globalism is definitely part of it, but that's not the conflict between the characters. The conflict between the characters just kind of doesn't exist. Like, the reason he needed to say more, and the reason I disagree with him being a stand-in, is that fundamentally, at the end of the day, your movie needs a compelling antagonist. And for a lot of people, Killmonger having a few short speeches that explain his whole personality was enough for people to say he was a compelling antagonist. For me, I saw a compelling character that the movie was preventing from being a compelling antagonist. He could have been fantastic if he had had more presence in the film. And I say more presence because everyone thinks that the Joker is in every second of The Dark Knight. He's not. He's only in the film for half an hour if you put all the scenes. A 2.5 hour film and the Joker is in about 30 minutes of it. It's the fact that his ideas are relevant throughout the film. The Dark Knight, you know, the gold standard, that is you know, essentially about like what evil will men do when they're pushed to that limit. And that's the whole philosophy of the Joker, and every set piece is about that. Harvey Dent is an extension of those themes. The scene with the boat is an extension of those themes. Black Panther doesn't do this. Black Panther instead meanders around, having an admittedly very cool James Bond-esque chase scene and heist scene in Korea, which I thought was cool, but it had nothing to do with the film. The film doesn't really start until halfway through, and by that point it's too late to build up Killmonger as an antagonist and build up these themes. And for me, as someone that really wants to see the best in films, just mentioning something briefly in a couple snippets of dialogue is not the same as a film being about that. I don't think it's comparative to Star Trek in anything more than that they're both trying.
I certainly agree that Killmonger wasn't an interesting protagonist in his own right, but I stand by what I said, that I don't think that's how they were even intending to go about it. He wasn't an interesting antagonist. The concept the concept was an interesting antagonist. The alternative to what T'Challa and the Wakandans had always done was an interesting antagonist. It really was the ideas that were the protagonists and antagonists much more than the characters in this movie.
And I should say, sorry to keep interrupting you, but I should say that this is a problem that Marvel has had since the beginning, which is that in the entirety that Marvel has been going, the Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming is pretty much the only interesting, relevant villain any of their films have had. Some people like to say Loki, but Loki does precisely nothing in any of the films in which he's the main antagonist. He is really more of like a side neutral character who'll stab you in the back along the way. Like that's what he excels at. Whenever he's the villain, he doesn't do anything. Like he's just been in them more. But the Vulture's the only one that's had an actual, you know, film revolver.
It was a human being, yeah.
Yeah. Like so, it's not.
I agree.
I should say this is This is a Marvel problem. This isn't just Black Panther. But
Sure. And I agree with you. I also thought that the Vulture was unbelievably good. I'll make a small point about that. There have been, how many of these movies have there been up to Homecoming, where it was like 12 or something?
oh, more than that, like 15, I think.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah.
So in 15 movies or whatever, however the hell many of these movies there have been, and you've had like robots and space invaders and gods and everything as villains. And of all the things in Spider-Man Homecoming, the scene where he's in the car and he figures out who he is, after all of those big supervillains and all that, a guy with a gun was the most tension I have ever felt out of one of these movies when it comes to the villain.
Of course, and this is like, I mean, maybe if we move away from Black Panther a bit, because we were talking about
Sure.
Marvel in general. To me, this is something that I feel Marvel misunderstands, which is that they seem to generally think with their villain, go big, have them want to end the world, when they fail to realise that that's not what makes a villain compelling. If we're being honest, and here's where I'll get the death threats, Darth Vader's not a particularly compelling villain. He's really not. He's iconic and he's fantastic and he's so cool and funny and badass because he's surprisingly sassy considering he's the Dark Emperor. Well, he's the Dark Emperor's, top man. Like, but as a villain, he doesn't do an awful lot. But what a real good villain does is one that personally attacks the hero. Like Steppenwolf in Justice League is horrendous because not only do we not know who he is, we don't know his relation to the hero. But the Vulture,
no, and it was and they didn't even bother. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, they didn't bother.
I did see Justice League, and I have to tell you, by the time Snuffleupagus showed up, I was like, "Wait, is he one of the Amazon people? What is he doing?" And then, like, they didn't. This is let me segue for one brief second. I saw Justice League recently, and it was fucking god awful. I can't. That was unreleasable. I can't. What did they think was going to happen when they released this into theaters?
I enjoyed the characters.
I didn't have any fucking idea who Cyborg was, other than that he was a cyborg. They tried to do a little bit with him, but they didn't give us any chance to get to know him. I didn't understand what they even needed the Flash for. Why did they think they were going to need somebody who was fast when one punch would take him out? And there wasn't a single goddamn thing that Superman was doing that Wonder Woman and Aquaman, they were all just there to punch him. I don't know.
I think for me, I liked the personalities of the characters more than I liked that. I'd say that from the get-go, I felt like Aquaman, I had a very clear idea of who he was, and he was my favourite of the bunch. I don't like Ben Affleck as Batman. I just don't. I'm sorry, Ben. I just don't like Batman. And I don't,
you know something.
Ben Affleck doesn't like Ben Affleck as Batman. He wants out. So
it's true that.
But Wonder Woman, Cyborg. I agree. Cyborg didn't get much, but I liked whenever Cyborg was there. I liked whenever the characters were talking to each other, and I thought Aquaman was good. But I agree with you that the plotting of that film is horrendous.
It just wasn't even conceived or thought of by the time they put it to film. But as I think about it now, this is a bad segue. Let's go back to the Vulture.
Yeah. A man with a gun was scarier than an army of robots.
Yes,
because it's relatable.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you had said personally attack Darth Vader. There's where you are, Darth Vader. When you personally attack the hero, Yes, and the fact that Vader was something that the hero needed to overcome, and making him Luke's father. Now he has to overcome. I think there's a latent fear in everybody that they're going to turn out like their parents, and when your parents are Darth Vader, then you're really really fucked. And then eventually you see the good in your parents, and all that, and that's what made that compelling. You're absolutely right, and that's why the prequels didn't. Well, it's part of why the prequels didn't work, is that Darth Vader was not a character that you can make the focus of anything. Otherwise, you're going to get somebody going, "I do not fear the dark side as you do. I don't do that."
The a big problem for, well, I mean, you know what? It's technically owned by Disney now, so I can use that as an excuse to talk about it. For me, the Star Wars prequels, the issue was that it focused on Anakin and not Obi-Wan. To me, it would be far more compelling to hear about the teacher who lost his student and best friend to the dark side than watching that said man fall, because we didn't really know. What we did know about him wasn't very specific, just that he was a good friend and a good warrior. But what we see in those films is not what Obi-Wan describes in the original Star Wars film. Like when Obi-Wan has that twinkle in his eyes and the smile, and he says he's a good friend and he was a talented warrior and pilot. You never see that from him in the prequels, and I think really how this is how Andrew would have done it. I would have had this be about Obi-Wan's failings to steer Anakin the right way, and I would have had Darth Maul be the villain for the entire trilogy, and have the whole thing be Obi-Wan sort of feuding with Darth Maul, and having that negligence because he himself is so angry that Darth Maul killed his teacher, that Anakin sort of loses his way in that he's a conflicted and confused young man as it is, and seeing his own mentor so consumed by hatred, in a way it sort of fucks him up. I think the fact that they had something great there with Darth Maul, because he had an iconic look and he was cool to watch. I think, and also that if there's one thing that trilogy is lacking, it's a villain. Like, it's sort of a joke of every single prequel there was a different apprentice. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
complete side note, but
Oh, sure. God, and this is why, we're coming up on. I have to pee so bad, dude. I have to pee so bad. I gotta get out of bed. But no, it's worth mentioning. This was going to be more of Disney and stuff, but I think I think the Black Panther stuff was pretty good that we talked about. But getting more, we were going to talk a little bit more about the Disney stuff. But I'll just say I'll leave the Disney thing at this. Disney is doing. I so far my impression, they're doing the events that happened in like the Force Awakens with Kylo Ren killing uh, Han Solo and all that. There's just things that stand out as things that mattered to you. And as I look back at the prequels, I can't think of anything that made me feel anything. Like, think of things where I laughed because it was performed so badly, or just all the obvious red letter media, or even my brother's observations about things. But of
my
anything that made an impression on me.
my real issue with the Star Wars sequels is the complete aversion to do anything really stylistically different. Like, I think that with the whole joke with The Last Jedi was that it was trying so hard to be unpredictable that it became predictable. And
Mm.
and I thought The Last Jedi was decent, but my real issue since Disney has taken over is they are making it more like a Marvel film, right down to the sense of humor. Like, there's that thing like Just Right, the YouTube channel said that it's bathos, where you'll have a serious scene and then you'll undercut it with a joke because you don't want people to think you're taking it too seriously. and that's a very stylistically Marvel thing to do. And
Sorry, I'm sorry to I see what you mean, and that's true to a point, although I think that I think that kind of these movies speak with their own voice, as did, by the way, the prequels spoke with their own voice. It was a terrible gargly voice that you'd never want to listen to, but they had their own identity, and I think these movies also have an identity separate from the other two trilogies, and that's one part of that. That's something that I don't like, that kind of humor. I don't think that's unique to just the Marvel movies. I think that kind of humor is everywhere nowadays. I but I do think that separates them enough from the other two series to where they at least have their own unique identity, and they're not just aping off of the way that the original trilogy sounded in terms of its dialogue or whatever, although sometimes they do because it's, continuity or whatever. Can I make one final point about Star Wars before I wrap this up and go urinate?
yeah, sure.
Okay. This might be the most controversial thing I will ever say on this podcast so far. Regarding The Last Jedi, I fucking loved the Rose character. Everybody else hated her almost as much as they hated Jar Jar Binks. I fucking loved her for one particular reason.
She was psychotic.
Yes, she was a stalker, fangirl, weird psychopath. And in all of these movies, out of all of these movies, she seems like the kind of person that would be just weird and crazy enough to actually be part of a resistance movement. And that's one of I'm reminded I'm going to pimp the Malazan series again. Read the Malazan Book of the Fallen, everybody, because I need somebody to talk about it with. But it reminds me of the kinds of people that are in the Malazan series, and they're just these crazy Marines that go off and do crazy things and get themselves killed and blow people up and shit. And it instantly reminded me of that. And I'll leave it at that. Out of all the Star Wars movies, she was the only character that I had ever seen that seemed like she would actually be a crazy resistance fighter.
Okay, right. My big problem with Rose is that the films are not aware of this. They are not in on the joke. They decide that they're going to do something, but which, to be honest, I don't really think J.J. Abrams is an aware enough writer to do this with Rose and make her a psycho stalker. But even if, say, for the sake of the argument, he did, the only reason he would do that is because he caught on to the last one and went, oh shit, she's actually a bit weird, we're going to have to play on that. Like, I don't think for a second that they really knew. And also, saying that she's someone you could believe being part of a resistance, this also ties into my other big problem. Why the fuck is there another resistance versus empire plot? It's... why? Like, I'm not going to defend the Star Wars prequels, but if you go to the extended universe, expanded EU, whatever, EU, vote leave. No, but if you go to the Star Wars EU, you've got lots and lots of different things that you could have pulled from, like the new Jedi Order and stuff like that. Obviously, they wanted to do their own thing, but they didn't do their own thing. They did Rebels versus the Empire. They just changed the names. It's even when they make changes in the plot and in the characters, the dynamic is still the same, and that, I think, prevents it from really having its own identity as a new take on Star Wars. They have yet to make a film that isn't intrinsically linked, because their next one, the Han Solo movie, God help us all, is again going to be intrinsically linked to the original trilogy.
I grant you that to this day, that was one of the I had several problems with Force Awakens. Not many. It might surprise some people. Not that many, but one of my problems was, and it wasn't a big problem. I enjoyed both of the new films a lot, but one of the things was I didn't understand how much. I didn't understand if, like, with the New Order and the whatever the hell the rebels were called at that point. I didn't understand how much more powerful one was than the other. They seemed to be equally matched, and I didn't understand that. And at the end of Last Jedi, I didn't really understand it any better than I did. Like, how all of a sudden is this a resistance again? I guess because they blew up all their ships when they were going to the thing. I don't know. But anyways, yeah, I grant you that. That's definitely a weakness. So now that I've said that, I gotta go, dude.
Well, next time we're going to be arguing about Birdman as like the sequel.
Yes.
And for the record, neither of us like Birdman, but there's one thing that we're really disagreeing on about it, and you'll have to join us next time to find out. I am Andrew, I am the Limey, and I'm with the Yank. Say bye, Gabriel.
Bye, Gabriel.
Sweet.